So thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to the ACRL Distance and Online Learning Section DOLS Instruction Committee's Fall Workshop, an LTI integration story connecting library resources and campus learning management systems. My name is Teresa Mastrodonato, and I am the co-chair of the committee, along with Lisa Campbell. We are very excited to have Hailley Fargo and Ryan Spellman from Northern Kentucky University join us today to present. Excuse me. I want to thank the other members of the instruction committee who are instrumental in selecting the topic, finding our speakers, creating the advertisements, and getting the word out about our workshop. They are Nicholas Cassis, Catherine Howell, Caitlin Meyer, Laura Roden, Katie Spires, and Cynthia Tomes. A couple of housekeeping items. Caitlin will be collecting questions in the chat for the Q&A at the end of Hailley and Ryan's presentation. And then Katie will be the moderator for the Q&A at the end of the presentation. We really want to thank Hailley and Ryan for agreeing to present today, and for everyone who's joining us during the live webinar, and for those who will watch the recording later. So I want to start by introducing our speakers. Hailley Fargo, she/her, is the Interim Associate Dean and Head of Education and Outreach Services at Northern Kentucky University. As Interim Associate Dean, she collaborates with her colleagues to lead and support work in library assessment, communication, and reporting. As the Head of Education and Outreach Services, she leads a team to provide information literacy and makerspace instruction and to organize outreach efforts across campus. Her research interests include undergraduate research, middle management, and using participatory design methods in building teams. Hailley is also co-founder and editorial board member of LibParlor, libparlor.com, a platform for building a community of researchers in LIS. Ryan A. Spellman is an online learning librarian at Northern Kentucky University Steele Library. He has a Master's of Library and Information Science from Kent State University and a Bachelor of Science in Communication from Ohio University. Prior to his academic library career, Ryan spent 14 years working in a public library setting. Hailley and Ryan, the floor is yours now. And thank you again for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. Ryan and I are really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about our LTI integration story. So we've got our photos on the next slide. So you know who we both are. I'm Hailley and Ryan. We're here to chat with you. The other people that we wanted to make sure we gave a shout out to in this presentation is the team that we're both a part of, Education and Outreach Services. We have this beautiful sculpture. Its nickname is Stego, the big dinosaur you can see in the photo. So we always like to show Stego off when we can. But our team, EOS, as we call ourselves, was really integral to making this LTI integration happen. And so we wanted to make sure that they also get a shout out in this presentation today. It was definitely a team effort for many years, and we'll dig into that a little bit later in the presentation. So to give you a sense of where we're headed, Ryan and I are going to talk a little bit about how we prepared for this LTI integration. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing now that we have this LTI integration. How are we assessing its impact and making decisions about what to do next? We'll talk a little bit about that sort of next step and our lessons learned through this process. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and discussion. We'd love to hear from you about what you're thinking about, questions that you may have that come from our presentation. And so before we move to the next slide, Ryan and I do have a quick poll that Brian is going to launch for us. Thank you, Brian. And we just want to get a sense of kind of where you're at in your own LTI integration. So have you implemented it before? Are you thinking about it? Or are you not quite sure what an LTI is, which is totally okay. Just to get a sense of who's in the room with us. So we see those results coming in, which is great. And it looks like right now we're thinking about implementing an LTI is the highest category, which is great. But we've got a nice mix across all three categories. Give it just another second to see if there's any other. Oh yeah, they keep coming. Great. Right. So it looks like we've got a lot of folks thinking about making an LTI integration, which is awesome. Some folks who have already done it, congrats, can't wait to hear more about that. And then some folks that are also not fully sure what we're talking about, which is totally okay. We're going to jump right into that. So I think that that sounds good. And we've got the poll, so let's dive in. Thanks everyone for giving us that sense of where everyone is at. So to briefly just touch on an LTI and what does it look like? So with an LTI, we're talking about a learning tool interoperability, essentially having different platforms speak to one another to share tools and information. So for NKU, Northern Kentucky University, we use Canvas as our LMS, our learning management platform, where courses are created, students engage in that space, and faculty build, course shells to do that work. And so we're having Canvas talk to our SpringShare platform, particularly LibGuides. And so you can see on this screenshot one of our beautiful LibGuides that we've put together. And then you can see off on the left-hand side, there is that kind of menu, thank you, Ryan, that menu navigation space. And that's Steely Library Resources. That's the LTI sort of in action. So that's what users will see on their screen when they're in their own Canvas course, looking at different things. And this navigation is customizable. So faculty can go in and they can remove different settings, they can add, they can readjust that navigation order. In this example, obviously the library resources is right at the top. But this is a feature that's enabled on all of our Canvas courses, linked to a specific LibGuide, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then faculty can, have students move directly to those resources and spaces, which is a really handy way to make that connection between library resources and coursework without having to jump into a new browser window or things like that. So that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're working towards and working within. So on the next slide, I just wanted to kind of set the stage about our LibGuides positionality. So you'll notice that on the right-hand side, there's a beautiful handcrafted embroidered hoop. I'm an embroiderer. That's a gift that I made for my previous boss when I left my former institution, Penn State. And this is a gift that was given in jest, but also sort of helps frame how I'm thinking about LibGuides, how I'm leading the department in thinking about LibGuides, and how we're working together to think through that platform. So I came from a large institution where we had over 600 LibGuides, and there were a lot of questions, a lot of conversations I was involved in that kind of frame how I approach the LibGuides platform. So the biggest one is sustainability and maintenance. The more LibGuides you have, the harder it is to potentially maintain them, to make sure that the links are working, that they're being used. And so in thinking about our context here at NKU, I've thought a lot about how many LibGuides is the right amount of LibGuides. And I know that Ryan in his role is also thinking a lot about, what's the perfect number? How many guides is a good number? Additionally, thinking about that consistency of format. So one thing that I noticed when I was at my previous institution was a lot of debate around format. People wanted that autonomy, which LibGuides gives you, to build something that is your own piece. But we know from the learner side that if learners are trying to engage in different subject guides, it can be confusing if the format is not the same. And so I was really fortunate when I stepped into my role at NKU is that the department, the teaching and learning team, had control over what that format of LibGuides looked like, and already had a really consistent format that we sort of iterated on and made a little bit better for us. But that consistency of format both helps with that sustainability and maintenance piece, and also allows learners to really easily move from one guide to another. I spoke about this briefly, but that level of control over LibGuide strategy. At NKU in the library, there's about 25 full-time employees that work in Steely. And so it's really great to have a teaching and learning team that really has that control over what we're doing with our learning objects, what we're doing with our LibGuides, and how those work in that larger ecosystem of learning support for our students. One question that I always ask folks on my team when they come to me and say, Hailley, I'd like to make a LibGuide. Why are we making these guides? Why do we make them? What's their purpose? What's our learning object or our learning outcomes that are driving those learning objects? And so really being purposeful about what LibGuide we're creating. We're not just creating a LibGuide to create a LibGuide. We want to have some intentionality behind it. And then ultimately a question Ryan and I have been talking a lot about, and we're going to keep talking about in 2025, is our students learning? Is the guide doing what we want it to do? And are students taking away what we're hoping they're taking away? And if not, what changes can we make to support that? So I'm not anti-LibGuides, but that those questions and ideas really frame how I approach this work and how I think about how we use LibGuides as a tool in a way that makes the most sense. So let's think about preparing for our LTI integration. So on the next slide, we've got a couple of things that we did. So this project around implementing our LTI integration is actually part of a much larger multi-year departmental strategy around learning objects. I gave a presentation at LOEX in May of this year all about that larger departmental strategy. So if you're like, wow, I'm really curious where they started and how they ended up here, that bit.ly link on the screen will take you to my presentation materials from LOEX. Happy to chat about that further at the end, but this is kind of one project within that larger strategy. Part of that larger strategy was a small group in the department came together in spring of 2023 to identify a new layout for our subject LibGuides. So our department had control over our LibGuide format. We had recently moved over to SpringShare right before the pandemic, and we had moved our homegrown system into the LibGuides format. And we had probably not the most exciting LibGuide format that could have existed. And so the department was sort of ready to start talking about what should be on our LibGuides, what should those subject LibGuides look like, and how can we keep them consistent across all the different areas of study. So a small group came together. We identified a new format, one we were really excited about. We looked at a lot of LibGuides across the web, read a lot of articles, really thought about what makes sense for us and our users. And so as we were getting ready to make that those big edits to all of our subject guides, we thought, I wonder if it's time to move to integrating our LibGuides into Canvas. If we're going to spend all this time making those updates, can we get them looped into Canvas? And we had a pretty good relationship with the folks that oversee the Canvas administration. So we have some instructional designers and folks who are part of our Center for Teaching and Learning on campus who are responsible for the Canvas ecosystem. And we had a good relationship and we said, okay, let's start this conversation. And so when we started the conversation, we realized that we didn't have the right version of SpringShare. So to integrate an LTI, the LibGuides to a learning management system, you need the LibGuide CMS version of the platform. And so we realized at the end of the spring semester in 23, we didn't have the right version of LibGuides. So then it became, how do we find that funding to make this project possible? So over the summer, we were able to find some instructional equipment request funds through the university. And we were able to tell the university, yeah, this is an instructional equipment. You know, this is something that's going to help our learners. It's going to connect them to our library resources, and that, you know, we should be able to use our funding to pay for this platform upgrade. So we got funding, which was great. And then we were able to build that into our budget moving forward. And so once we had funding secured in the summer, we kind of had to move pretty quickly. So we did this in a condensed format. So with funding secured, we can continue to connect with our instructional design colleagues so that we knew we were going to work together to make this possible. And I also connected with a few external colleagues who had done this work previously. What I love about the LTI integration is there's some great documentation out there, both on SpringShare's website, but also in the literature about past institutions that have made this integration. As I mentioned previously, I had been at Penn State, and I was at Penn State when they launched their big integration between LibGuides and Canvas. So I reached out to the librarian who did a lot of work on that. Her name's Amanda Clausen. She's over at Duquesne University these days. And I called Amanda up and I said, hey, Amanda, can you tell me everything that you learned from that Penn State experience and from other experiences you've had? You know, what should I know as I'm going into this for the first time? So really appreciate a lot of that insight we were able to get before we got started. So we then created an LTI implementation work group. This was a small group, but our charge was to figure out how to implement this connection between LibGuides and Canvas that would start in spring of 2024, so January of this past year. So the goal of this group was to test that workspace, to work out all those kinks, to think about our marketing and communication strategy for campus, and to also figure out, you know, what else would we need to do to make sure that this launch is the most successful and the most amount of people know about it. And so that work group was charged in September of 2023 and worked until December. There was a team of 4 of us. I was on it and I chaired the committee along with our graduate teaching and learning librarian in our department who had done work in the spring to create that new LibGuide format. Then we also had our Canvas admin. His name is Tommy. You'll hear about Tommy in a little bit, who was there to really make sure he understood how the the LTI would work. And then we also had an instructional designer who was newer to NKU, just to get her thoughts on, what the integration looked like, and then to be thinking, how might she connect with faculty across campus to tell them about it and encourage them to use it. So that was our group. And so we did some of that back end work. But there was some other work that we had to also do as well. So we did a lot in the fall. So this was last fall. The department got together and we did a lot of different things. So as I mentioned, we had created like a new format. And we decided, instead of just taking our old guides and tweaking within that template, we were going to make a new template and move guide content over there. So the team converted 41 LibGuides into this new format all over the fall semester to be ready for the spring launch. We also realized that when you match metadata, you've got the, however you're matching what guide should go with what course. We realized we didn't have like a generic library guide to sort of help students know what to do, especially if there wasn't a perfect match on the metadata side. So we created a general Steely library research guide, and we solicited feedback from the entire library to really understand, what does everyone across the organization think should be in this general guide. We couldn't put everything in it, but we could put a lot of different things in it. We also, within the implementation work group, we also reviewed 132 course prefixes. So the way that we ended up pairing on the metadata side is we looked at all the Canvas and course prefixes, and we said, do we have a direct subject match? And we had that all in an Excel document. And so that ended up matching over 4,000 courses that we were then going to match officially in the spring semester when we launched the integration on the public-facing side. And so in that process, we worked out a lot of details for how that integration would look and work within our Canvas ecosystem, and really tried to understand, what is it going to look like on our user side. So the department really came together to do that work. And one thing that we did is we had a group retreat one day where we took old LibGuides and converted them into the new format. So we made it fun, and you can see on the photo there's a bell. This is a bell from my grandma. And so what we would do is every time we finished converting a LibGuide, you would get to ring the bell to say, I did it. A new LibGuide is all ready to go. So it was just a fun way to keep the process, which is a little bit tedious, right? You're making a brand new LibGuide, you're adding links, you're adding databases. The bell just made it a little bit more fun for us, which we appreciated. The other really big important piece, we were doing all this back-end work, right? We were getting the LibGuides ready, we were making sure that the content was ready to go, but we also needed to communicate with campus. So we created an informational handout, which is shared pictured right. And that sort of said, hey, the library's working on this project. We're really excited about it. This is what it will mean for you. Provide feedback. Look at your subject guide. Tell us what's missing. Did we get a link wrong? Is something inaccurate? Do you love it? Tell us. You can also see a copy of that handout if you're curious what the whole, it's a 2-page document, looks like. Again, at that bit.ly link from my LOX presentation, there's a copy of that handout in there. So we had a survey. Folks could provide feedback, ask questions, and we did a pretty big scale, large scale communication cascade. So we started with the deans across campus. We shared that information with them. We went to our associate and assistant deans. They meet regularly. We shared that information out. We shared it with all of our department chairs. And then we also shared it with individual faculty members, ones that we knew, and then also through campus newsletters, just to get the word out as much as we could. This change is coming. We want your feedback. We want your questions. We're really excited. So that's sort of our communication strategies that we took that fall semester. And so then we started to really, we were getting close to January. We were ready for this launch to happen. So the faculty feedback that we did receive was really helpful. They recommended resources. They said, hey, I use this database all the time. I would love to see it on your LibGuide. And they also provided helpful edits. Some of the guides that we had converted to this new format, the information was outdated. It was, information we had received from faculty many years ago under different librarians or different faculty members. So it was good just to get the current perspective of what information was going to be most useful to them and their students. The faculty were also really excited that we heard from. They were excited to share it with their students. They thought it would be really helpful, and they were appreciative that we were doing the labor to make it happen. Also during this time, we connected with a couple different faculty departments who didn't have a guide. So a great example is our world languages and literature department. So all of your foreign language classes, we didn't have a particular LibGuide for them. So we worked with that department chair who then collaborated with that entire faculty body to come up with a LibGuide together. So we created 4 new guides in direct collaboration with the faculty, which we thought was a really great way to make sure that the information was accurate and that faculty would definitely use those guides when the integration was launched. The other thing we were thinking about was some of our own departmental next steps as a unit. So we knew that we had done a lot of work in a short amount of time in the fall semester, but we knew that once the LTI integration was active, the work wasn't over. There was still more outreach to be done, more communication, more updates, and in many ways, this integration would kind of expose our LibGuides at a higher scale, and so we might get more feedback from folks who said, "Oh, this should be changed," or "What about this?" And so we were kind of preparing for that. The other really great thing that was happening was that we were gearing up to hire our first online learning librarian, which was Ryan. So we had some retirements in the department, gave us a chance to think more strategically about what types of roles we should bring into the unit. And NKU is growing our online student presence. And we had all these learning objects because we've been doing all this departmental work. And we were like, we need someone to really pick up the torch and keep running forward and help us think through the strategy piece, including this big integration that we were launching. So it was really awesome in interviewing Ryan to say, hey, we're doing all this really cool stuff and we'd love to have you aboard to keep moving this work forward. And so I'm going to figuratively pass it over to Ryan to take it from here.
Yeah, so this is a really great slide for me because still being kind of new, I was coming into this job and I was asking myself, well, what do I do now that I have an LTI integration that I'm working with? Where I worked before, there was talk about it and it wasn't anything that I was involved in and it wasn't fully implemented. So I knew about it and I kind of knew the capabilities. I knew it was a thing, but this was my first time actually dealing with it. So naturally, the first thing that I wanted to look at was how effective this thing was. I wanted to see statistics. And thankfully, Hailley had mentioned this gentleman earlier, but we have a brilliant campus partner on campus, Tommy Fix, and he approved me using his email address. It's okay if you want to reach out to him. He's super nice. If you have a quick question, he said it would be cool if anybody wants to reach out. But he, within my first week here, gave me a Power BI dashboard where I can explore the Canvas statistics on the LTI integration. And actually, I want to show you a really quick demo of it here. And this thing really impressed me because as you can see, I can go over here and I could click on a certain course and I will see the what they call Canvas calls checks, but it's basically how many times that Canvas is interacting with specific LTI integrations from the SpringShare suite. We can do it by instructor, department code. There's just all sorts of filtering that we can do here. And I'm very excited to look at this later, as we look back and kind of try to tell a story of how the LTI integration is going by looking at the descriptive data. This is going to be invaluable. I'm very excited to work with this more in the future. So talking more about statistics, there is also the SpringShare statistics. Those of you that have messed with SpringShare statistics can probably tell that this chart is homebrewed. It didn't come from SpringShare. But if you go into basically the same place that you'd be administering the LTI tool, it's the LTI tool builder menu within SpringShare. This is what they call placements. So it's essentially the locations that are calling the metadata that retrieves the proper content based on the metadata assignment. And SpringShare will log all of the launches, what they call launches, to those placements. So for instance, we can look at this type of data and we can see all sorts of trends, such as, students are using them a lot in the middle of the semester, using them a lot toward the end of the semester. That's just how you would expect. And you can see the same trend across summer of 2024 and then in fall. This year, the numbers went up even higher. And I would say that's probably because awareness is being raised. Hailley's been doing a lot of like outreach and mentioning this, and our librarians are doing the same, showing faculty that it exists and where students can find it. So they're kind of helping to spread the word. And I think that's why we're seeing our numbers go up. But there's a lot of ongoing work. So I came in, I've been here, started in summer, so probably around 7 months or so. And I've been looking at the statistics, trying to understand like what's happening in the back end so I can better support it. And I'm realizing that I need to do a lot of work in the future with understanding the statistics. So developing an understanding about what the data means. What I mean by this is like, so what really constitutes a launch count and spring share? I can see that data, but I don't really know, like, is it just when there's a top level click within Canvas to the LTI resource? Or do these things get fired when people are navigating, within that same iframe? Also, like, where do the Canvas and Spring Share statistics align? That's a big question for me. Do they even align at all? They don't precisely, obviously, because you have two different systems with two completely different perspectives looking at the data. But if they should at least have sort of a similar trend, right? I should be able to see a gap between them and see the same sort of thing happening over time. If they're not aligning in that way, why not? Is there anything different that we can do with it to better understand what we're looking at? One thing that I have already begun is to implement Google Analytics. This was already kind of implemented, but I made some changes. So I'm officially saying that our starting point with Google Analytics was on September 25th. That's when I know what kind of data it's tracking and that it'll be like a solid comparison later down the road for us to look back on. And what's nice with Google Analytics, for those of you that have used it before, the reporting features are amazing. You can go in and you can build segments, and it makes it so easy just to hop in and look at those at any point in time for any date range. And what I've done here is I set up 3 different segments that you can see. There's one that shows us that from Canvas, our traffic was 1,563 sessions. Now, a session is kind of a time of length of engagement. It's when somebody came. It's not every single time that somebody went back and forth. Um, so that was good. But then I realized that this isn't entirely accurate, because what about professors that might include a link in a discussion board to a research guide, or if there might be links to research guides within modules, those were getting counted there as well. So what I found after doing some digging around is that there's a specific host name that's used on the libguides that are being tossed to Canvas through that LTI integration that we have going. And it's the lgapi-us.libapps.com. So if we do from Canvas and also containing that host name within the session data, we see that it's still really high. That's 1,446. So you're looking at a 10% versus almost 9.5% of the traffic coming from Canvas. So it's getting used a lot, especially understanding that these are sessions that are being reported within Google Analytics. And the nice thing about Google Analytics is these things are documented really well. I find it hard to find information about what the spring share statistics specifically mean, but Google Analytics, there's a lot of corporations and businesses using this. So there's a lot of very granular information that you can get on what the numbers mean that you're looking at. So this is something that I'm continually working with. And my hope is that, probably by the end of spring semester, that I'll have something solid set up. So we'll be able to have a consistent way of looking at the interaction. Something else that I wanted to include with this is tracking the LTI. This is very important. If you're already doing it or you're planning on doing it, you want to make sure that you have a way to track it, because you saw Hailley mention all those different courses that they were looking at before, and it's a lot to look at, and it can get a little confusing as to what is going to which course. The first way that you can do this is just within the native SpringShare environment. The same place that you would go in to edit subjects for your libguides, you can get into the metadata, and you can export all the data into a CSV document if you wanted to. You can also do some manual filtering by doing manual text entry to the column names, but this requires you to know a lot of information about it. So there was this project I was already doing that was in much larger scope than just the LTI implementation that we're talking about today, but I wanted to create an inventory of all of our online learning objects. And I did this with SharePoint lists and a little bit of Power Automate, and basically a lot of kind of low code to no code implementation that is all within the Microsoft ecosystem for continuity. So somebody else could come in and just pick it up and administer it. So I avoided custom code as much as I could. And what I did was I baked in a way to track the LTI stuff into the inventory. And again, you can see it's manually tracked, right? So, but we have this sort of idea set up where the inventory is going to be kind of an ongoing annual thing that we're maintaining. So with this, again, going back to Power BI, and this was inspired by Tommy, I put together this tracking capability so we could click on a guide and we can see like what course prefix, what metadata that it's attaching to. So here we have a research guide for astronomy is only going to show up in courses that have the AST course prefix, or like art design that I was on before has a bunch because there's one design that's applicable to all these different courses. So, and it doesn't have to be that elaborate. I mean, you could just do, you could just use Spring Share and do regular exports. You could track things in a spreadsheet, I would just try to have some sort of plan in place so that you can keep track of everything, because it turns out to be quite a bit once it's fully implemented. And we wanted to talk about future directions and lessons learned a little bit. I have just a little bit on this one, because a lot of my future directions I just touched base on with my ongoing work. But one thing we do have ahead of us coming up in spring semester is we're going to do some very light user experience testing. And this again is going to be an annual thing that we want to do that's going to go well beyond the LTI stuff that we're talking about today. But this year we're going to make that sort of a focus, because I have a lot of questions about how students are interacting with this within Canvas and what it looks like to the student. And this is really the only way that you're going to find out about it. Statistics are only one part. You also need to be looking at the user and engaging with the user about this sort of stuff. So basically, it's going to be task-based. We'll have them within a Canvas shell and have them doing some things with library resources within the Canvas shell. And we're also going to have an exit survey that's just to get a usability score, a system usability score that we'll be able to use to compare on future user experience testing. Some of the questions that I hope to address with this are things like awareness. We do see statistics showing that it's being used, but do these user experience testing show that students already know that it's available? How many of them are like, oh, I had no idea this was even there? Discoverability, are they able to find it easily within their course? And also the user behavior within the embedded resource. One of the questions I have is we have our menu system within the LibGuides, and then there's all this Canvas stuff that's around it. I mean, any LMS, has tons of buttons and tons of links. So is there any confusion over the embedded resource versus the menu system within Canvas? Is there mix-ups going on there? And as you can see, a lot of this stuff is feeding into this bigger question that I've been developing since I stepped into this role, and that is there such a thing as a LibGuide that is optimized for this purpose? Is there a way to have best practices, specifically with a mind toward library tool integration? And for me, that's going to involve looking at Canvas with these resources open in a lot of different screen resolutions and responsive formats, and as well as taking all this data from the user experience testing and looking at the statistics. This is going to be an ongoing question that may never be fully answered, but we're going to keep looking at it as we go because we feel it's very useful for students to have this.
And so there's a couple of lessons as Ryan and I were preparing, we sort of settled on 4 lessons that we've learned and are always continuing to learn in this process. So the first one is really around outreach efforts. We found a lot of value last fall communicating it to faculty, to campus, to as many folks as we could. But we know that this work is never over. So I know Ryan and I have both experienced times this past fall where we've been chatting with a faculty member kind of casually. They're talking to us about the library and we say, oh yeah, did you know that, your library resources are linked in the Steely Library Resources in Canvas? And they say, what? I didn't know that. And so then we try to have them pull out their laptop if possible. We go into their Canvas course and we show them where it is. And we get a lot of, wow, like, oh, that's cool. So that work is never over. We're always continuing to do it. We can communicate as much as we can, but there's always more communicating to do, which is important to always keep in mind. We also really realized and knew that it's really valuable to have a strong LMS connection, and that this work is a lot harder to do if the person who oversees your LMS, whether that be Canvas or Blackboard or Brightspace or something like that, if you don't have that strong relationship, this work is much harder. And so we're really appreciative that Tommy and our Center for Teaching and Learning, the folks that oversee Canvas, are both really excited about the library and very pro-library, but also really willing to work with us to figure out what's going to work best. I know last fall when Tommy was in the LMS, experimenting with things, he created a sandbox and we tried a bunch of stuff and we tried different wording and we looked at different pieces. And we use the auto magic feature where we're just kind of automatically connecting metadata on the back end with different course prefixes. And so it's really great to have Tommy there as a partner, as an advocate to really make that happen. But we recognize that relationship doesn't exist for every university, and that work can be a little bit harder if that connection isn't as strong. I think the other thing I think about a lot as a department head is that building capacity piece. How do you get a department ready to do this work? And then how do you have the right person, Ryan, in the role to really keep moving that work forward and be asking those really critical questions that will make our LibGuides better, will make the LTI integration better, that will help our learners even more. So I think a lot about the long game as a department head. So how am I working with the team to build capacity, to have those conversations in advance? And even if we have to say, it's not the right time to do this, we're taking steps towards that work. So as I mentioned, this project was part of a much longer departmental strategy that lasted many years. But because we had been having those conversations really regularly, when I came to the department last fall and said, okay, guys, let's convert 40 LibGuides in one semester, everyone was like, all right, this is good. We're ready. We're ready to do this. We're ready to pitch in. So that really helps also move the work forward in a more aligned way. And then also Ryan, an online learning librarian. That is really wonderful. It's so awesome to have Ryan and his expertise on the team and also around this learning object work, particularly the LTI integration. And I think just having someone who's always thinking about these things, I can only think about it a little bit among all the different other projects I'm thinking about, but having Ryan in the role, really driving it forward, really diving into things, around accessibility, around our user experience testing, around automating using tools like Power BI and SharePoint and things like that, just really helps move the work forward and is really appreciated and makes it all better. So those were some of our big lessons we learned along the way. And so with that, I think our timing is just about perfect. We'd love to open the floor for questions. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to keep talking about this.
Thank you so much, Hailley and Ryan. This has been awesome. We do have lots of questions. Brian, are you able to make Katie a co-host so she can bring in the questions? If not, Lisa, would you be willing to ask the questions? I can send you the link to the.
Sure, I can do that.
Let me send you the link to the questions. Oh, sorry. I sent it to everyone. Sorry. Everyone can see the questions too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We have a lot of really good questions that came in. So to start off, there was the question I think that we can all relate to is how do you convince professors or faculty to include the LibGuides in their Canvas modules? Now, this was asked earlier on before you explained your integration story, but do you want to speak to that faculty buy-in part?
Yeah, definitely. I know that last fall when we were thinking about it, we were really trying to especially relate to faculty who are already doing research assignments and we're already having students use library resources. And that, with the LTI integration, you're just connecting the students to resources more reliably, and in a way where if a link dies, you don't have to find the new link. We're maintaining that connection between the resources and the Canvas ecosystem. So really trying to stress to faculty, this makes your job easier. If you've already got students going to library resources, this is just another way to make that connection. I think the other thing that maybe worked in our favor is that I mentioned one part of the department worked on a new LibGuide format in the spring of 23. The other group worked on updating some of our videos and removing some of our videos. And so we did have some faculty that came out of the woodworks once we removed some of those videos because the links in our Canvas modules that we create went dead. And so they were like, hello there, we're wondering like what happened to this video? And we said, well, we got rid of that video, but we've got this beautiful research guide that you can direct students to. So I think that you can't win all the faculty over, but you can try some different things. I don't know, Ryan, if you've had any luck in thinking about how you communicate that with faculty.
Not so much being so new. I mean, I had a couple consultations with faculty that were adjunct and they weren't aware of it. And they were actually putting links to library resources manually within their modules. And once I showed them that, they were like, oh my gosh, it's so cool that this thing's there. So yeah, it really does come back to the awareness piece too, a lot of times.
Hey, that's excellent. So, shifting, or I guess actually a follow-up to that, was did you get feedback after the semester was over and how the Canvas was used in the class? But I think you actually did share an example earlier of how you pointed it out to them during a course. But do you have any other examples of how you might have gotten that feedback?
Yeah, I think
You've
one
done
thing that
any?
came to mind when Ryan shared the Power BI is that one class, we have a pretty a robust online MSN nursing program. And there's a particular textbook that we use with those students. And previously we've been getting dozens and dozens of chat messages at the start of every semester being like, how do I get to this textbook? And it's a classic textbook that is listed both in our EBSCO discovery layer and also in a ProQuest. The EBSCO link is not the right link. We've got to go to ProQuest. And so we had been having all of this, like duplicative chat messages with students. And so we actually created a course-specific LibGuide for MSN classes. We collaborated with the faculty member who sort of coordinates all of those sections. You can see that there are a lot of MSN 600 sections. And so we added a new space about how to access your textbook on the LibGuide for that particular course. And we saw a lot of, we saw a decrease in chat traffic. So to us, that indicated this is working. We've got this, located in their Canvas space. They can access that textbook, and that, helps the students navigate to what they need to do. And I would say, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, our allied health colleagues are the ones that really use our LibGuides the most. That's where we see a lot of the hits and traffic. So for us, that indicates they like it, it's resonating with them, and they're definitely taking advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, that MSN 600, I mean, it's always at the top. As you can see right here, it's 779 this semester. It's just a lot.
Yeah, and just one section, which is
Yeah.
really, really incredible. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's one example.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so then shifting, we have a couple questions about the IT buy-in, and I know you did speak to that, but there's a couple folks that I think have had harder times than y'all have had with Tommy Fix, which I think is a great name to be the IT person. But anyways, the questions are, again, how did you get that buy-in? Um, and was it a big lift? What was the timeline of getting that and getting the necessary um, metadata that you needed? So I guess those are the questions. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I could tackle a couple of
I
them.
kind of put them all together, but how
Totally
do you get
cool.
that IT buy-in and really how big of a project is the scale, I think, or how long does it take?
Yeah. So I think that In terms of the IT buy-in, what was kind of interesting, which Ryan and I didn't go into too much depth in this presentation, but our instructional design team actually used to be organizationally a part of the library. So when this project first started, our instructional designers, including Tommy, were all part of the library structure. So they already kind of knew what the library was about and what we wanted to do. In the middle of this implementation work group, they transitioned out of the library into our Center for Teaching and Learning, but we still had that sort of strong tie. So I think in terms of, from if your IT is not connected to the library or that relationship isn't as strong, I think some of it is playing the long game and working to build that relationship. And it might not actually come from you. It might need to come from above you. So for your supervisor or for the dean or for other folks to sort of get involved at some of that political relationship building, especially because this has a really big impact on our students and is really beneficial. And in many different LMSs, there's already other tools embedded in. So it's just another tool that is available and can be used. I will say that one thing that was really great about the LTI was that SpringShare did have some really good documentation about how to make that integration happen. And so what ended up happening is I did a little bit of work on the front end. I think one of the first times before I met with Tommy and other folks, other instructional designers, and I pulled a bunch of those links and then I sent them to Tommy and others and said, hey, this is what SpringShare is telling us. Can you read this documentation and, does it resonate with you? And I remember Tommy being like, oh yeah, we can do this. We can make this happen. Which I know is not the attitude that every IT person has, but it was really great to have in that particular way. In terms of the lift, what Tommy was able to do was he pulled essentially a spreadsheet of all of the course prefixes that were in Canvas. I don't know exactly what magic he did to pull that connection, but he pulled that list for us. And so myself and our graduate teaching and learning librarian essentially went line by line through all 130 some course prefixes. And we said, do we have a subject guide that matches that? And we wrote that in the spreadsheet. And so we use the auto magic feature, which essentially is just it's auto magic as the name implies, but it just automatically connects when you've got that metadata on the backside. So it was kind of a tedious lift on that front side once we had the spreadsheet to go through, but it was also a really great way to expose the gaps. It became very clear to myself and the other librarian of where the holes were in terms of, is that a program? Is that a department? Is that a whole school? And then we could sort of do more targeted outreach. So for instance, the world language and literature example that I gave, I sent an email to all the department chairs and then I followed up with that chair and said, hey, I know that you don't have a guide. How can we work together to make that happen? So I will say that it is time intensive in that relationship building piece. There's a lot of time in emailing and communicating, and we did this in more of a compressed timeline. We essentially started in July and we launched it in January. So we moved pretty quickly through that process, but I know that other places might take over a year or more. We just got the funding, and when we got the funding, we knew we had to move. If we hadn't gotten the funding last summer, we probably would have waited until the next budget cycle would have opened to add that into our annual budget and then launch this past fall. But so yeah, we moved quickly, but it was definitely worth it, even though it was very fast.
Thank you. I agree, that is quick. From our own LTI story, which we don't need to share how long ours took, but thank you for that answer. There's two technical questions to clarify. The Power BI dashboard that you showed, are those stats coming from Canvas or SpringShare? Was it Canvas?
Yeah, so from Canvas, the one that I showed where we could click on the course codes and see the statistics. The
Yes.
other one is coming from SharePoint lists that we're manually entering data into. So the
Okay.
one that I was using to track LTI, there's that one, and then there was the Canvas statistics.
Okay, and then another clarification, does your LTI integrate automatically or is it optional for the instructor? I'm sorry if you covered that.
So the Steely Library Resources header or navigation bar shows up automatically in any Canvas course. Now, within the Canvas ecosystem, there are different like little iterations. So there's sort of the big major one with all the credit bearing courses. And so that's where that integration, the LTI integration is active. So it shows up in every course, and then faculty have to go in and disable it if they want to remove it from the list of options. But if you've been in LMSs, you know that there's often, dozens of options of different things. So we try to make sure that we're still active in those courses.
Awesome. And then one final critical question that came through. How do you protect our library user privacy using all of these data and tracking tools? So I will give you time to respond, and I think that'll be our last question.
That's a great question.
Yeah, and I don't know that I could speak to it directly. I do know that, let's see here. Yeah, there's this student usage and there's this user ID, but it is anonymized, I believe. So this is the closest that you get to anything that's identifiable within the data that Tommy gives us. Tommy would know more though about, student privacy and things. And of course, the SpringShare statistics that I was talking about earlier, those are all just launch counts. There's no IP addresses or anything like that associated with those. And the Google Analytics is similar, although we could probably get IP addresses. We don't have anything set up to include those within the reports.
I will say too, with the Power BI, we're able to, in this dashboard, understand what faculty are using or not using the LTI integration. And for us, this is really internal data that we wouldn't publish more widely, but just a way for us internally within the department to know, oh, is there a certain area that's really using it? Is there a certain professor who's really, actively, having it integrated into their courses? But we're not necessarily drilling down into what student is using it. As Ryan indicated, we've got some student IDs, but those are anonymized in this particular data set.
Mhm.
But definitely something we're continuing to think about and want to be cognizant of.
Thank you for that. And there is a request in the chat for the Getting Started guide that you mentioned, if you're willing to share that with our users, but there's also compliments and kudos. And so I think if there's nothing else, that's going to conclude our presentation. I want to thank you both for presenting. I think there was so much that we learned from your story. Thank you to Teresa, the ACRL organizers, Brian, Eloise, the committee members, and everyone who's here. I think I covered everyone for joining us today. And so this recording will be made available online. And I believe Hailley and Ryan would be happy to connect with all of you that are here. So
Absolutely.
Definitely.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.